From the headquarters of Talasio English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Saini Gray. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has returned home after his historic meeting with the President Moon Jae-In of South Korea. Images of the two leaders raising a toast has resonated around the world. Their meeting ended with a banquet complete with a cake showing a united Korean peninsula and a musical performance. Earlier in the day, Kim and Moon signed a joint statement to denuclearize the Korean peninsula and bring a formal peace agreement to their people, 65 years after the end of the Korean War. It is the first time any North Korean leader has crossed into the territory of the South. Both leaders have been very enthusiastic about their meeting, with Kim calling it a new era of peace and Moon saying this summit would be a gift to the world.
If the people of the North and South can freely come and go along the path that I traveled today, and if Panmunjom, the symbol of heart-wrenching division, where we are standing now, becomes a symbol of peace, the North and South that have one blood, one language, one history and one culture will return to becoming one, and people of all generations will enjoy prosperity.
This handshake took 10 years to happen. And when it did happen, the entire world was watching. It's a historic and highly symbolic gesture, to say the least. As soon as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un crossed into the south to meet President Moon Jae-in, every step brought the two nations closer. Kim came with a special message.
This is just the start and the tip of an iceberg, but I hope that our first meeting and what we discussed can satisfy the people who had such expectations of the summit.
This landmark meeting at the Peace House of the South Korean side of the border took months of preparations from both the countries. The climate that made the meeting possible began to develop when South Korea hosted the Winter Olympics in February and invited delegates from the north. The tension between the two neighbors started melting when Kim's younger sister, Kim Yo-Jong, went to attend the games. It was a public relations coup for the DPRK. After months of speculation and follow-up, finally these two leaders are moving towards better relations. By the end of their first day of meeting, both sides set their goal to denuclearize the Korean peninsula, formally end the Korean War, and help unite families divided between North and South.
I hope we will be able to talk frankly and come to an agreement, to give a big present for the Koreans and the people around the world who wish for peace.
The next big thing the world is looking forward to is the expected meeting between the US President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. This unprecedented encounter would come just months after a vicious war of words, with Trump referring to Kim as Little Rocket Man, threatening North Korea with total destruction and tightening sanctions.
It means they get rid of their nukes. Very simple. They get rid of their nukes, and nobody else would say it. It'd be very easy for me to make a simple deal and claim victory. I don't want to do that. I want them to get rid of their nukes.
The meeting is expected in May or June. For now, people are happy to remember this big step when the leaders of the two Koreas met one-on-one, shook hands and hugged.
World leaders have welcomed the summit between North and South Korea. US President Donald Trump said on Twitter, after a furious year of missile launches and nuclear testing, a historic meeting between North and South Korea is now taking place. Good things are happening, but only time will tell. In Colombia, FARC party leader Jesus Santrich has been taken to hospital. 17 days ago, Santrich began a hunger strike to protest his arrest, which he says violates the peace deal between the FARC and the government. Santrich was arrested 2 weeks ago at the request of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. He's been accused of drug trafficking. The former guerrilla leader is also fighting an extradition order to the United States. Before being transferred to hospital, Santrich was detained at La Picota prison in Bogota. And the Colombian presidential candidate Humberto de la Calle said peace in his country could be threatened if the agreement between the FARC and the government is not implemented. The Liberal Party candidate also said he will ensure Colombia does not return to war if he is elected. He added that the government was not acting honestly by reviewing the accords after they had already been signed. De la Calle represented the government as chief negotiator in the Havana peace talks with the FARC.
A state that does not keep its word commits betrayal. It is very serious what the Colombian government is doing. It committed to an agreement. It held a referendum for it on Congress. And later, it started reviewing it once those members of the guerrilla have left behind their weapons. The weapons have been destroyed, and they have entered civil society.
And there have been many criticisms that the Colombian peace agreement is not advancing quickly enough. One area where progress has been slow is the search for the thousands of people who disappeared during the conflict. And one of the reasons for this is a lack of government funding.
In the final peace agreement signed by the Colombian government and the FARC, Point 5 included a strengthening of the Institute of Forensic Medicine to deal with the post-conflict situation, but so far this hasn't happened.
We haven't received any kind of financial support until now. On the contrary, there have been budget cuts by the government in the last few months.
The victims' families are losing any hope of finding their loved ones because of a lack of political will on the part of the government.
The search unit started functioning just 6 weeks ago. Dr. Luz Marina Monson was named director, but she hasn't received enough resources to build a team that can achieve their goals and provide adequate answers to the victims' families.
In Colombia, 60,000 people are recorded as disappeared in the last 45 years. But this number could be higher, because after the peace agreement, more victims are willing to come forward.
The National Registry of Disappeared Persons must be strengthened. They could also create an organization that gathers all the information about disappeared persons that are in the registry and match this with the cases that are being documented now.
Despite the financial difficulties, the Forensic Medicine Institute continues its work of identifying people who disappeared in the course of the conflict.
We have disinterred more than 550 bodies. 39 of them have been identified, and we have returned 7 bodies to their families. We have received about 34 bodies from the International Red Cross, which match the information given by the FARC.
Victims' families are asking the armed forces to help with information about the disappeared people, just like the FARC has been doing.
The Ecuadorian government has announced that President Lenin Moreno has accepted the resignations of the Interior Minister Cesar Navas and the Minister of Defense Patricio Zambrano. The president had given Navas and Zambrano 10 days to capture the leader of the armed group, Olivier Sinisterra, known as Huacho. He's been responsible for the kidnapping and murders of 2 journalists and their driver, and for later abducting another couple. The replacements for the 2 ministers will be announced in the coming days. And Ecuador's Attorney General Carlos Baca has been removed from his position. He was lead prosecutor of corruption investigations in the country. 128 out of 131 assembly members voted against him. The move came after Baca disclosed a private conversation between the former comptroller Carlos Poliz, who fled to the United States after being accused of corruption, and the former head of the National Assembly, Jose Serrano. During the conversation, Poliz and Serrano discussed plans to remove Baca. Baca, who was in office for 11 months, was also a key player in the detention of Vice President Jorge Glass over corruption allegations. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced he's spoken to the President of Panama by phone and agreed to the return of ambassadors. They've agreed to reactivate flights and install a high-level commission which will work on solving the differences between the 2 countries. President Nicolas Maduro was speaking at the opening of Expo Venezuela 2018. The 4-day event is intended to show Venezuela's efforts to boost production and revive the economy. Maduro pointed to the success of pre-sales of the new cryptocurrency, the Petro, which he said had totaled $3.3 billion.
Y aquí estamos de pie. And we are still standing with our Bolivarian economic plan, with our priority sectors, and with the petro, which has brought us excellent news. Extraordinary news, I would say. So with all these initiatives, including the food supply mission and the petro, we are building the strength we need so that after the elections on the 20th of May, we can have great economic revolution of growth, of productivity, and develop a healthy economy. Venezuela needs a healthy economy in trade, in finance, in the currency. We need to build the basis of a new economy.
And still in Venezuela, some of the presidential candidates have voiced complaints about what they say is a failure to comply with electoral guarantees, which the government introduced for the current election campaign. They have called for a meeting with the Electoral Council to discuss it.
Independent candidate Luis Alejandro Ratti went to the CNE headquarters in Caracas to ask for a meeting between the presidential candidates and CNE officials. He wants to review some topics of the electoral guarantees agreement that he considers not to be totally fulfilled. For example, the preference that some media expressed for candidate Nicolás Maduro.
We've been reporting for a long time that there hasn't been transparency for the electoral guarantees, and they haven't been fulfilled. The agreements haven't been fulfilled. We are asking for an urgent meeting between the 5 candidates and CNE officials.
Apart from this, Ratti also stated that next May 16th, opposition candidates will announce if they will participate as a union or individually. Minutes later, Nicolás Maduro's chief of campaign, Jorge Rodríguez, arrived at the CNE to answer Ratti and Henry Falcón, who also denounced the same things as Ratti. Rodríguez affirmed that those accusations are fake and also asked for a meeting with public and private media.
I want to hear one manager, one president of any media company say if there has ever been any kind of phone call or any suggestion from the government about what they should or shouldn't broadcast. Just one. We completely respect freedom of speech, even when it is used to spread lies or to insult the revolutionary forces and our candidate.
Another candidate, evangelical Javier Bertucci, has been campaigning in the Vargas state. He has turned one act into his campaign's icon, giving soup. In his speech, he insisted in the need to increase local production and eliminate exchange control. He also recognized the work of the CNE.
To this day, guarantees have been fulfilled. The issues we had yesterday in Aragua and in the state of Miranda were resolved thanks to the CNE's intervention. They even started an investigation against the mayors in those cities. They are keeping their word about the guarantees.
During last Thursday, audits for electoral data finished, as well as the ones for software of the whole technological infrastructure. These are part of the 14 audits to be done before, during, and after the elections.
We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
We have suffered an imposed heritage of exclusion and frustration for generations. Our future is doubly bleak as we face the unabated racism and deepened deprivation reserved for Black Americans. Commonly depicted today as dangerous, carrying firebombs in their hands and hatred in their hearts. Who noticed before the fact that their hands were idle, their pockets empty, their hopes frustrated, and their hearts broken by indifference and contempt? Everyone is aware that a relatively few young Negroes have resorted to violence. But how many know that the unemployment rate for Negro youth in major urban centers has soared between 35% and 50%? They live in squalor in slums. They are cheated in education. They cannot hope for normal married lives. And they can expect more disease and earlier death than their white counterparts. To be a Negro in the United States is to be the victim of a system of deprival in a context of personal humiliation.
In Brazil, indigenous people have marched to the National Congress, calling the government of Michael Temer to be illegitimate and denouncing his very bad record on indigenous rights. So let's go to our correspondent, Mia Alberti. She's in Brasilia with an update on this story.
Today is a very important day for indigenous rights here in Brazil. President Michel Temer has signed the homologation of an indigenous land the size of 20,000 football fields for the Guató people in the state of Mato Grosso in west central Brazil. Now this is relevant especially for two reasons. Firstly, because it's the first homologation of an indigenous land by President Michel Temer, and secondly, because this was signed yesterday, the day that thousands of indigenous people were protesting here in Brasilia. And it's not very often that we see this type of action-reaction in politics. The president announced this on Twitter. He said that finally these indigenous people will have the rights to their permanent territory. And President Michel Temer remains one of the worst presidents in terms of indigenous rights so far. He only signed one homologation, whereas his predecessors signed dozens. But it's a small step, but it's a step nevertheless, and an important one.
We thank Mia Alberti for that report. And Nicaragua moves towards normalization after a week of protest that left at least 10 dead and hundreds more injured.
It is time to build peace through dialogue so we can continue all together to fight against poverty, to fight for welfare and happiness for all Nicaraguans.
And university students have accepted the invitation of the Catholic Church to participate in the peace dialogue called for by the government of Daniel Ortega. Students are asking for the violence to stop, and they're asking for security for all. They held a vigil in the capital city of Managua in memory of those who died during the protests. And Barbados' Prime Minister Frondel Stewart has announced the election date. It's May 24th. Now, Stewart had until June 4th to call the election. Nomination day for all candidates is set for Monday, May 7th, and this brings to an end to months of uncertainty in Barbados. Earlier this week, the opposition leader, Mia Mottley, had demanded that he call the elections, saying the delay was hurting the country. She has welcomed the Prime Minister's announcement, but said there were still problems with the date.
There will, of course, be some anxiety on the part of parents and on the part of some of the children, and indeed some of the young people who are taking exams, as some of them are also first-time voters. They will have to navigate two serious decisions in short order. The Prime Minister and his government therefore need to explain to the country as soon as possible what arrangements will be put in place so as to minimize this anxiety. Anyone who has a child knows what I'm talking about. Those who claim that this is the result of some grand strategy really need to appreciate that this is nothing more than a royal fumble.
The leader of the United Progressive Party, Lynette Eastman, who was a member of the BLP but has now formed her own party, said she is excited about the election.
Contesting the election. We've started the process, we started our campaign, so we simply continue to roll out our campaign. We've been getting an excellent response, and we believe that we will do well when polling day comes.
Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister says hundreds of English persons of Trinidadian origin were possibly affected by the Windrush scandal. Now, although he does not yet have actual figures.
Now back in Trinidad after attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London, Dr. Rowley told journalists that as the Windrush scandal unfolded, they discovered that Trinidadian nationals had been affected and even deported.
And this went under the radar until it came to the High Commission not too long ago. And the High Commission, I met one such person on Monday night who was quite grateful for the assistance that she had received from our mission in London when she faced that issue before it became an international embarrassment.
Prime Minister Rowley says the various Caribbean heads of Commonwealth were assured that the situation would be resolved, and that included the issue of compensation for those affected. In explaining why the issue was so important, he said that it was not just the persons whose right to remain in the UK that were being affected, but their families as well.
This thing worked its way all the way from welcome, come and help, to go home. And government policy changed along the way, and that is why political parties in Britain are now pointing fingers at each other. And interestingly enough, the chairman of this CHOGM happens to have been the Home Secretary, who had a serious role to play in what the outcome was. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had to be very diplomatic, but be very firm in treating with this matter.
Dr. Rowley says that this situation will take some time to be resolved, but it is one that the region will be monitoring.
We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
You cannot have a drone without cobalt. You cannot have your planes without cobalt. If there is a shortage of cobalt, we can't wage a war. I have a very tiny country called Belgium, but I need a land that has so much resources. With that land, they were exporting rubber, they were exporting elephant tusks, specific ivory. We had about 10 million Congolese dying. It was modern day slavery. Within a few weeks of him being in power, he was deposed. Within months, he was assassinated by the CIA on January 17th, 1961. He was a democratically elected leader of a country, assassinated simply because he wanted the resources of his country to benefit his people.
Welcome back. People in Rwanda have been shocked by the discovery of genocide-era mass graves. At least 200 bodies have been dug from graves in the village of Rusororo, near the capital, Kigali. In a country where the grim pain of genocide still reverberates, this new discovery is being called the most significant in a long time. Around 800,000 people were slaughtered between April and July 1994 at the instigation of the hardline Hutu government. The workers digging the graves also found the clothes and footwear of the deceased, which the authorities say might help in the identification of the victims.
They told us about this mass grave where we dug up bodies. The first time we dug, the team doing the work told us that they had reached the bottom without finding anything. So I decided to reopen the pit with another team. We dug and found the bodies. They told us the first team hadn't got until the very bottom.
Thousands of people have been protesting across Spain after a court failed to convict 5 men on rape charges for an attack on a young woman during a bullfighting festival in 2016. Angry demonstrators packed central Madrid and other cities, shouting shame and no means no. The 5 men were jailed for 9 years for sexual assault, but many saw the sentences too lenient. Under Spanish law, the charge of sexual abuse differs from rape in that it does not involve violence or intimidation.
To be honest, I feel shame we are still in a country like this one. In the 21st century, they are saying this is just abuse and not rape. Just an abuse, but she had to defend herself. I feel shame.
It causes me indignation and rage. I am a lawyer, and the more I read the sentence, the more rage I feel. I think the law should be changed in order to adapt to international law. No is no, and there's no need of violence to consider a case a rape.
And our correspondent Eduardo Marin brings us more details on this controversial case.
The Spanish government has shown its disagreement with the verdict on the case known as La Manada, Spanish word for wolf pack. The members of the wolf pack, 5 young men, were accused of sexually assaulting an 18-year-old girl during the San Fermin celebrations back in 2016. Those 5 men have been sentenced to 9 years in prison after the court dismissed the rape charges and only accepted the charges of sexual abuse. The Spanish Minister of Justice, Rafael Catala, has asked for the law to be revised and updated. This reaction by the Spanish government comes after thousands of people protested yesterday in different cities across the country. Many women were raising the question, what else should happen for such an aggression to be considered rape? Maybe they need to be killed, they asked.
We thank Eduardo for that report, and we've come to the end of this news brief. But for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.